Okay, so good morning and welcome to the second panel discussion of the day on the second day of our One Nucleus Building Life Science Adventures Careers Conference. I'm Alicia Gallios, BD Manager at One Nucleus, and I'm really delighted to be opening the session this morning and to have such a wonderful array of panelists joining me. So the topic for our session now is going to be Race to the Top, progressing inside and outside of the lab. And I think that's potentially a key point there. So in the previous discussions so far, we have heard aspects around mentoring, work on your CVs, recruitment, networking, so potentially all themes that will tie into today's discussion. So before handing over to Natalie, who will be our moderator for this morning, just a quick reminder on some logistics. So we are recording the session, and like all other panels, it will be available as part of the on-demand content on the conference app. That should be uploaded by the end of today. And if you can all please kindly remain muted during the main discussion with cameras off, that would be greatly appreciated. Finally, the chat box is enabled, and like most of the discussions so far, they've been very interactive, which is also greatly appreciated. So please don't be shy, and please use the chat box to drop your comments and your questions in. And then either myself or Natalie, we can dip in and out and highlight people's comments and questions. So with that, I'm going to hand to Natalie Winfield from DomainX to be our moderator for the session this morning. Over to you, Natalie. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Alicia. So I'm Natalie Winfield. I'm Director of Commercial Operations at DomainX. So joining me on the panel this morning are Marta Westwood, who's a research leader at Charles River Laboratories.
Hello, everyone.
Who's CEO at Leaf Expression Systems, and Dugdale, who's a freelance consultant, and Susie Dilley, who's CEO of Warwick. I think that's everyone. Hope I haven't left anybody out. So I thought I'd start by introducing myself and talking a little bit about my route to progression, and then if all the other panelists could do the same, that would be great. So in terms of my own background, so I started by doing a degree at the University of Bristol. I really enjoyed my time there, so I stayed on to do a PhD, which was in sort of synthetic chemistry, looking at natural product synthesis. So after I completed my PhD, I joined a company called NCE Discovery, and that was back in 2005. So I started there as a lab-based medicinal chemist. So I hadn't really done any medicinal chemistry before. It had all been synthetic chemistry. So that was a really great experience for me. So I learned the sort of med chem aspect of things. And that was really good. A couple of years later, NCE Discovery merged with a company called DomainX. So NCE Discovery had the sort of chemistry aspect, and DomainX had the biology. And DomainX had a specialized sort of platform technology called CDH, which is combinatorial domain hunting. And that's still a service we offer today. So it's a way of expressing proteins in a combinatorial manner. So I then stayed on with the enlarged company, and I sort of progressed through the lab. So I was promoted to senior scientist, so still sort of working in the lab most of the time. I then was subsequently promoted to team leader, and at that stage I was still doing some lab work. I was doing a sort of mix of lab work and also sort of project management, which was really a great experience, you know, to get involved with that side of things as well. Then an opportunity sort of came up internally to move into the commercial team. And it wasn't really something I'd sort of planned. It was really that, you know, this opportunity came up, and, you know, I thought it was really exciting. I felt it was something I could do. I felt the job advert sort of matched my skills. I thought, you know, yes, this is me that they're talking about here. And, you know, it was just something I was really excited about. So I went for that, and I got that job. So that was initially products and contracts manager. So I was involved with preparing and writing proposals and contracts, and also doing the marketing for DomainX as well. And then subsequently I was promoted to Director of Commercial Operations, which is my current role. So really, that's, in a nutshell, my sort of route to progression. So I've stayed with basically the same company all the way through, and I've moved from a lab-based role into a commercial role. So that's my background. Marta, would you like to go next and talk
Sure.
a little bit about your route to progression?
So I'm currently a research leader at Charles River, which is the contract research organization. But how I end up here, so I have completed my master's degree in material science. And after that, I got a great opportunity to come to UK to do PhD, and PhD was in slightly different area to what I was doing my master's degree. So I went into the nanomaterials when I was looking really at the fundamental science, looking at the organization of organic materials that were to replace the silicon-based materials that were leading to the miniaturization of the transistor and diode.
Hello, Rob Dogger speaking.
And after that,
hello, Ray. How are you? Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks.
I think we're getting a bit of interference. Yeah. Okay, do you want to carry on, Martha?
Okay. Yeah, sure. I think, and so I have completed my PhD in UK in nanomaterials, and then I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't have a clear path in my head what I wanted to end up. The only thing that I really knew that I was good in the lab, and I really wanted to carry on working in the lab. And I was looking for different opportunities that were there, and you go through the search of the jobs, and then opportunity arose to go to Institute of Food Research at the time at Norwich, where I did a fellowship there, and that was in a completely different area because I went into the food science area. But what I was carrying with me was the skills, the lab skills, and using of the same technologies that you can apply to the different fields. So I was looking at the multi-layer systems, but the application here was to look at the coatings made out of the natural materials to coat nutrients, to protect them from harsh environment of the stomach and to deliver them into the colon. So you can think about the probiotics as an example. So then after completion of postdoctoral fellowship, I was actually lucky enough to have a commercial small project while I was working at the Institute of Food Research. And it was actually a project for Pfizer, looking at the atomic force microscopy and imaging components of the vaccines. And that was my first contact with the pharmaceutical industry that I had at the time. And then it followed on into my career that actually I decided I want to do and I want to progress, and that was the pharmaceutical area. And I moved to the company called UCB, and I moved to the group, to the structural biology group, where I was really looking at the early stages of drug discovery. So you look at the hit, target validation, initial hit identification, then optimization, and then through to the final candidate selection from the biophysics point of view, because that's what I was carry on using throughout all different stages and different career paths that I went through. And I joined the UCB as a senior scientist. And then after a few years, I have been promoted to the principal scientist and expanding my knowledge and expertise within the pharmaceutical sector, and especially in the lab-based skills, and looking really into the data analysis and hit identification and all the stages that are involved in the drug discovery. And after a few years, I decided I would like to experience a different area of the same pharmaceutical sector, but it's really the contract-based. So it's completely different mindset.
Marta, you've just gone on mute.
Sorry, I'm back on. So instead of looking at the pipeline, you really look at the interactions with the number of different clients. So there are different skills that come into play when you really look for the CRO organization. Those soft skills comes into the forefront of the work that I do currently, but I would like to say that I'm still lab-based. So even though I'm currently research leader, I'm still heavily involved in the lab work, and I do all those experiments, which I actually enjoy and love doing. So you can still progress through different ladders. So you can have scientific ladder, and you can have a managerial ladder, and that's what the Charles River has. It decided that sometimes it's too much to handle when it comes to the work and management of the project or management of the groups. So Charles River decided to split those two paths, and you can progress on the scientific ladder. So through working the lab, strategically influence the areas, companies. You can offer the companies who are doing very exciting things that the Charles River might be interested in collaborating or partnering. But you can also move to the parallel ladder, which is obviously management ladder, where you can manage people who are actually carrying the work in the lab. And we also have ability to offer internships where young scientists come to the lab and they have rotation over the period of 2 years, so they can explore different areas within the Charles River.
Thanks, Martha. Yeah, it's really interesting to hear how, there's the parallel tracks at Charles River, and you've been able to progress and sort of stay in the lab as well. Simon, would you like to go next and say a little bit about your background?
Sure. Good morning, everybody. I am the CEO of Leaf Expression Systems. We're based in Norwich, and a bit like Charles River, but much smaller. We are a CDMO. And what we do is we express proteins and manufacture proteins and vaccines and things in the leaves of plants. To date, I've been the CEO of, I think it's 5 or 6 public and private companies. And I think it's fair to say that none of this was ever planned in my career. When I was younger, it's just a question of going with the flow and taking some risks and taking some chances and accepting roles that I hadn't really planned for to end up here. And so I did a degree in zoology at Swansea, but it was very cell-based and immunology-based and neurophysiology-based degree. And I ended up from there at LMB in Cambridge for a couple of years. So I did 2 years in academia before I moved into biotech, essentially. And I moved into biotech with an American company in Cambridge, and was there for several years before a group of about 5 of us formed our own contract research and development company just outside Cambridge, offering contract services. We made some products that we sold and licensed, and some of those products are actually still generating royalties and revenues for the company. So some of it was quite interesting and quite challenging. And we learned a lot, and I certainly learned a lot because we were, like most small companies, very underfunded from a biotech point of view, and so we had to learn to live on what we were earning, essentially. So that was great experience. As part of that, I took on the dealership for a technology from a US company, and then took on managing all of their European dealers and agents and everything else, and providing technical support for all of the people in Europe and all their companies in Europe and customers in Europe. And then I started also training the company's staff in the United States and helping them in the United States. And around about this time, the FDA were changing the rules around contract manufacturing in terms of the license required to be able to be a contract manufacturer, because up until that point, it was very difficult actually to be a contract manufacturer and manufacture multiple products. And so the company I was with asked me to go over and then lead the design and build of a GMP facility in Massachusetts to do contract manufacturing. So I did that, and I was in the United States for 5 years leading that business. So we designed and built the facility and then began operating it and generating revenues for the company. I think it's fair to say that I probably would not be doing what I'm doing today if I hadn't gone to the United States for those 5 years. I came back to the UK in a variety of senior management roles and business development, commercial roles for both small molecule and biologics companies. Again, most of them service businesses. And then my first CEO role was for a Malaysian contract manufacturer, actually. So I went to Malaysia and raised the money and designed and built a 5,000 square meter GMP facility in Penang, on the mainland, Penang in Malaysia, and I did that for 4.5 years before moving to Cobra Biologics here in the UK. Cobra have been in the headlines a lot recently, obviously, because they were involved in manufacturing the COVID vaccines. So when I joined Cobra as CEO, they were a public company, a listed company on the AIM, struggling a bit. So we had to do an awful lot to rescue the business. We ended up selling it to a group in Sweden called Recipharm, and then delisted it, which was a good thing for the business, because as a small CDMO, being listed actually is quite a challenge, because all of your competitors can see exactly what's happening with your business and what your share price is and everything else, and they can use that against you. So Cobra obviously have gone on gangbusters since then and have done extremely well under the stewardship of Peter Coleman. So I stayed after the sale, integrated the two businesses for a year, and then left. And then through a variety of other roles, CEO roles, I've ended up at Leaf as CEO here. And I joined Leaf just as the business was about to start commercializing this technology, this expression technology. So a building was built for the company. The technology is a spin out from the John Innes Centre in Norwich. And the John Innes Centre, as you may or may not know, is probably one of the world's leading plant biology facilities. And so they developed this technology. And we've now been commercializing that technology by manufacturing proteins, antibodies, vaccines, VLPs, et cetera, and expressing them in the leaves of plants. And we are going through the growth phase now of trying to work out how we expand the business and how we ourselves get to a point where we can provide GMP grade material for clinical trials, and hopefully moving on to supply commercial supply of products made in the plants. So as I say, it's been an interesting journey. None of it was planned. So when I left Swansea University, I had no idea what I was going to do, actually. I wanted to be a game ranger, but as it turns out, I've stayed in the Northern Hemisphere, basically, doing contract manufacturing and services and learning the business as I've gone along.
Thanks very much, Simon. Obviously not quite the career that you planned, but very interesting nonetheless. Anne, would you like to go next? I know you were sort of on the panel this morning, but I guess we have some people joining who weren't on that session.
Sure, yeah. So hello everyone, my name's Anne Dugdale. I currently work as a freelance consultant in business development and alliance management, but a bit like Simon, when I started out, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do. At one point in my time, I thought I wanted to be a vet because I love animals. But I hated science subjects, which is ironic considering I've ended up in the pharmaceutical industry. And because I didn't like science subjects, I did languages, which I enjoyed and which I was good at. And I ended up doing a degree in modern languages. Had no idea what I wanted to do when I finished my degree. So I spent a year doing a business studies course, as much as anything to defer the decision as to what on earth to do to earn some money. But actually it was useful because it did give me some insights into parts of business that I enjoyed. And I decided on the back of that I really wanted to get into marketing. And I spent the first 10 years of my life initially doing FMCG marketing and then subsequently working as an account director at an advertising agency. And at that point, I was driving 2 hours a day to get to work. The office was in Chelmsford and I was living near Stevenage. So I was driving 2 hours a day each way to get to work and decided that really wasn't a life and that wasn't something I wanted to do. So my primary motivator for my next job was to find something close to home. And that had to be less than half an hour's drive as far as I was concerned. And that really was the only real motivator for me. But a friend of mine suggested that I was in an area where there were lots of pharmaceutical companies, and had I ever thought of the pharmaceutical industry? So knowing very little at all about the pharmaceutical industry, I decided to start looking into it and was lucky enough to persuade a very small company that was actually only 5 minutes down the road from home to take me on. I took a pay cut to do that. But for me, that was a kind of something worth doing for the sake of having a job that was near to home. So I took a pay cut. I joined them as a marketing assistant, and the first thing they said to me was, well, you've got to go out on the road. So 2 days a week, you've got to go out on the road for at least a year, because you can't do marketing in the pharmaceutical industry unless you've got some idea of what working with doctors and all that side of things is about. So that's what I did. I then progressed up through various marketing roles and finally ended up moving into business development. Again, not because very much like Simon, really, my career has sort of come about by happenstance and by taking advantage of opportunities that have been offered to me along the way, and being curious and kind of sticking my head above the parapet. So I had an opportunity to move into business development, thought that would be interesting, and did that for a number of years, but realized that what I really liked was not so much the doing the deal, which tends to be what motivates business development people, but I actually liked looking after the relationship once the deal was signed. And one of my early business development roles involved exactly that. So we were building an international network of distributors, and I was responsible for appointing those distributors and then looking after those commercial relationships once the deals were signed, which then ultimately led me to my last role, which was as head of alliance management for a company called Mundi Pharma, who are based on the Milton Road Science Park in Cambridge. And I was there for 11 years heading up their alliance management function, looking after global deals, European deals, distributor deals. I mean, every kind of deal you might imagine, deals that were in development. We had a very broad range of deals that the company was involved in. And so I was specifically focused on looking after those deals post-signature and those relationships post-signature. And finally left that company in March of last year, about 2 days before lockdown, because they were going through a restructure, and decided that I would try my hand at doing some freelance and consulting work, which is what I've been doing ever since. So a lot of similarities to Simon in terms of, no structured career path, no kind of predetermined, this is what I want to be and this is what I want to do, but have thoroughly enjoyed everything that I've done along the way, and just kind of taken the opportunities that have come to me that have seemed interesting.
And yeah, I think it's really interesting to see how a lot of us have progressed just by sort of seizing opportunities and not necessarily pre-planning our route to progression. So I think that's a really interesting theme. Susie, did you want to go next?
Yes, so I'm Susie Dilley. I'm CEO of Valerix, and Valerix is an oncology therapeutics company. Now I'm actually going to build exactly on that story that Natalie's just highlighted from Anne and Simon, in that although I had a very clear goal in mind, even from primary school, the route to get there has been very much a case of opportunism, looking at the opportunities that have arisen. So I decided when I was about 9 or 10 that when I grew up, I wanted to make drugs. This was a quite definite point where it was the first time that my mum had explained to me that actually sometimes when you go to the doctors, they don't have a medicine to treat you. And I was absolutely horrified by this whole idea. So at that point, I said, when I grow up, I'm going to be a scientist. I'm going to create new drugs. And that goal has always been there, but the route to get there has not been remotely how I expected it to be. So I went into university at Loughborough to study medicinal and pharmaceutical chemistry. Again, it's very much on goal. I felt that the chemistry was the bit that I really enjoyed at school, and having that more targeted medicinal and pharmaceutical chemistry really spoke to where I was aiming to get to. And I got to the end of my degree and was actually a bit disappointed that I couldn't immediately walk into a pharmaceutical company and get a decent job developing drugs. So I went on and did a PhD, staying at Loughborough in synthetic organic chemistry, which I felt by this time I was starting to understand how the pharmaceutical industry worked from looking from the outside, and felt that I was particularly interested in medicinal chemistry and in process R&D. So those were the areas that I intended to focus on. When I got to the end of my PhD, I briefly took a job at a contract synthesis company who had sponsored me during my PhD. So it was a natural progression to move to there. But then a good opportunity came up to do a postdoc at Warwick University. And this, although this is the one point where I made a decision that could actually have taken me off my ultimate aim, because it was more about looking at plant hormones and looking at mechanisms to study uses of plant hormones. So although it was based in the chemistry department, it very much was the point where it started to bring biology into my science as well as chemistry. And I class myself these days as a chemical biologist rather than either a chemist or a biologist. I think it's almost a jack of all trades situation for my science training now. So my postdoc had more biological application. And in fact, at the end of my postdoc, or at the end of the postdoc contract, we realized that the platform technology that I'd been working on in the postdoc research was ideal for spinning out into a company. So working with the tech transfer office at Warwick University, we started up a spin-out company offering a service to the pharma industry. Now, this is the first point really where the opportunism comes in. So I was very fortunate to be awarded a Royal Society of Edinburgh BBSRC sponsored enterprise fellowship. And that brought me from the world of science into the world of business, or at least starting to understand the world of business, that I could act on the interface. And I stayed absolutely in the lab at that time, but also had to walk into the world of business. So I'm sure Simon will recognize the story, but in a small company, when you're starting up a company, particularly a spin out from a university, and you are the full-time employee and everyone else in the company actually is a full-time academic, it is a bit of having to be able to do everything. So understanding the finances, which was taught to me by the Enterprise Fellowship, carrying out the science in the lab, but also being able to go out and do the business development, finding the customers in order to bring in, just to be able to pay myself at the end of the month. So it was very much a jump off the end of a cliff coming out of a university contract and into a spin-out company that was solely dependent on me, and then taking on an employee as well to help with the lab work so that I could concentrate more on the business development, but still being able to walk into the lab myself at any time that I was needed. Not just that I wanted to, it would be nice to say I could stroll into the lab whenever I felt like playing in the lab, but actually it was as needed. And we ran that for a couple of years, offering the service, receiving customers from a number of reasonable sized pharma companies as well as from biotechs. And we were turning that over quite happily when we were approached by a private investor who had a private biotech group, the Seek Group, and they suggested that perhaps I should be using my platform technology in-house for in-house R&D rather than selling the service for a relatively modest service fee to other people to get the benefit. So we took the technology into the Seek Group. So this was spinning out another company out of the original, and ran that as an in-house R&D operation for a while. I was going to say 5 or 6 years, it may have been slightly longer than that, before the technology produced one program in particular that was of interest, an oncology program. And as Seek at that time, we're looking more towards over-the-counter medicines rather than at oncology clinical trials. We then spun that out again to start the joint venture with Valerix. So the joint venture between Valerix and Seek became where I moved into in order to run the clinical trials on the program that I had started. And now that has moved on slightly, so that I, as part of that role in the joint venture, I then learned everything that was going on at Valerix. Again, it's opportunism. It gave me the opportunity to learn how clinical trials were run and all of the processes behind Valerix in the science and in the business role. So when there were various board changes at Valerix a year ago, I was then asked to step up and become CEO and to lead the company forwards. So it's really been a case of following the science for me, that I've followed my project through a number of companies to get to where I am. And that's somewhat to my surprise, I have to admit it. I'm now the CEO of an AIM-listed company in order to continue progressing that science and work towards that ultimate original goal of making drugs for people with unmet medical needs.
Susie, yeah, it's really, really interesting. Just a reminder to the audience as well, if anyone would like to ask any questions, you can use the chat feature. Okay, we've got a question here, I think. When doing career turns, did you fill knowledge gaps ahead, or did you move and then learn on the job? So from my side, I learned on the job, really. So obviously I had my background in chemistry, so I was a medicinal chemist, so that was straightforward, using my sort of skills from university. And then my move into the sort of commercial team was very much learning on the job. I'd obviously gained a lot of the skills during my time as a medicinal chemist. I'd already been involved with sort of proposal writing and that kind of thing as well. But it was quite a steep learning curve, and it was very much learning on the job. And another, I think, important aspect to that is something that I wanted to cover as well, is sort of managers and mentors as well. So, my boss, Tom Mander, who's CEO at DomainX, was very supportive. He very much guided me through the process, and and that was really important, the support from someone like that. Did anyone else want to sort of comment on that topic?
Yeah, I think every time you move jobs or move into a new role, even within the same company, I think there are new things to learn. So I've learned on the job pretty much as well. I didn't do an MBA and I didn't do a PhD. Everything I've learned along the way. But Natalie, as you say, you can't really learn those things without somebody who's prepared to teach you. So I've had a number of really, really excellent managers in my career, and mentors as well, and mentors who are outside of the company. And I still have people that I go to who are outside of my company, who are not necessarily older than I am, but certainly have different experience from my experience, and they are willing to help me and be a sounding board for ideas and what have you. And I'm also doing the same for other people now. So I'm involved in a mentoring program as an alumni of Swansea. They run a mentoring program for students that are coming out and starting businesses. I mentor other people in the business, and of course, as a non-exec director in some companies and advisor to other companies, you're also trying to pass on some of that experience and knowledge along the way with those other businesses too. So I'd always say to people, if you get an opportunity to move into a new role, either within or without the company, and you're concerned about the fact that you may not have all the experience to do that role, take the job, because you will learn it when you're actually doing it. So don't be put off by the fact that you think there may be some knowledge gaps.
Yeah, I think it's really important to have that network, and it's great that you can sort of give back to that as well. Susie, did you want to?
Yes, I was just going to add to Simon's point there, really, that I think it's just important to know what you know and know what you don't know. So if you go into a job and you don't have all the skills that you think are needed for it, you say, well, actually, can I get some help on that? I'm really interested in learning this, but can I get some help? And I think where I've done that, particularly in my progression point, is learning that biology. So particularly when I moved into the Seek group and we had a lab running there full time, I was testing new drugs that I'd thought about from a chemical perspective from my official training. And then I would say to the ladies who were working in the lab, can I test this in the cell lines? And we would run some pretty standard cell line tests on it. But I would go into the lab initially to find out how it was done. So I knew I was asking for something realistic, but then actually to do it myself. Because the only way I could know if what I was doing was sensible and what I was asking for was sensible was by doing the work and understanding that work. So for me, I had an excellent team there, particularly in that lab, who were prepared to not just allow me into the lab to watch, but to actually help me to learn. And I learned so much. And that was completely outside of all of the realms of training that I'd ever done, but it's enhanced what I understand and what I can do because of that. So that was very much on the job training. But from a perspective of saying, I'd like to know this. So I think always moving into a job, work out what you want to know in that job, what you're going to get out of it, how it's going to advance where you are, and how to get to your ultimate goals.
And did you want to comment on that? You've obviously had quite a varied career and moved into different areas.
Yeah, I think the thing that Simon said about having a good boss and a good mentor or mentors along the way really resonates with me, and I think is what has characterized my ability to progress throughout my career is, you know, I've been very fortunate in the main in having fantastic bosses who appreciated what I did, saw my skill set and wanted to help me to develop, and therefore encouraged me along the way and taught me things along the way that enabled me to make those other steps, and indeed, you know, encouraged me also to take opportunities that came along that weren't necessarily within the strict remit of the job description, as it were. And I think that's absolutely priceless, to have, you know, good mentors and good managers along the way who encourage you and help you and support you in what you're doing. I think, you know, when looking for a job, it's probably one of, you know, it's tough one to really measure at an interview sort of stage, but you know, it really is so different if you've got a good boss who will support you in that versus, you know, just somebody who's average. So, you know, I'd encourage everybody to try and work for the best people that they possibly can.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree with that. I think in many ways, who you work with and who you work for can be more important than actually what you're doing.
Definitely.
Marta, did you want to add anything to that?
So when I started working at Charles River, I didn't have any idea how to price your work. So when you work for the pharmaceutical company, you just go to the lab and you do the experiments and you deliver the data, and that's how you value yourself, and that's how you're perceived by different groups and the management. But when I moved across to the Charles River organization, which is obviously the contract research organization, you kind of go into you get a different perspective and different view of the work that you actually do. You learn, for example, I never thought how to price myself than the work I do. So by, you know, being involved in the proposal writing and the SOW writing, I have this new view of how to cost, how to manage the project from the budget perspective, which I didn't have idea before. Didn't care about those things because they were not important. So you kind of learn different things, not even expecting that you may have insight in those two different aspects. And, you know, as long as you are willing to learn, I think there is nothing stopping you. And I think sometimes you just have to push. And as everyone said, you know, it's very good to have a good manager who spots and who wants to develop you. If you do not have, if you are unlucky to have a manager who does not invest as much, you have to push. And if you have to change it, because at the end of the day, it's your career and your decision that, you know, will get you where you want to be if you have a clear goal. But it's at the same time, it's good to explore different avenues and learn, because you never know what you may actually like. You know, I never expected that I would like being in the pharmaceutical industry. It's just when you actually immerse yourself, when you take that opportunity and leap of faith, and actually it comes to the point when someone actually sees something in you, see the potential, because it's all about, you know, your future employees seeing the potential in you. Not necessarily have to have all the skills, but if they see that spark that you will be a good fit and you will learn quickly, then I think they will give you any chance to, you know, to join the team and develop.
Yes, if following on from that, we've had another sort of question along the sort of similar theme.
Natalie, can I just quickly add something to what Anne was saying about working for the best people you possibly can? I think that also applies as you go on in your career and you start hiring people. Always recruit the best people you can possibly get. And if you can find people who are smarter and better than you are, hire them in a heartbeat, because that's the way you build successful teams and will be successful yourself.
Yeah, so we're going to move on to the next question. So how does one convince the potential employer at the interview stage that he or she is keen to learn the necessary techniques or skills? A lot of time not knowing how to do something is clearly a disadvantage. So yeah, that's a really interesting question. And I definitely think it can be a challenge. Often, you know, when job ads are out there, they're looking for someone with experience or with a particular skill. So, you know, moving into a slightly new area can be difficult. For me, myself, it was probably slightly less of a challenge because it was an internal move. You know, clearly I still did have to convince people internally that I could do the job, but obviously they already knew me. I shown potential in the area of sort of proposals and contracts, something I was already involved with. So for me, perhaps that was a little bit less of an issue moving internally, and that can be one way also to sort of gain new skills. What are other people's experience of that? Susie, did you want to go first on that one?
Yes, that's fine. So I think it probably depends very much on who the employer is. And if the employer isn't prepared to put that effort in, as everyone's just said, do you really want to work for that employer if they're not prepared to teach you and nurture you and allow you that opportunity to develop those new skills? And that's something from an interviewee's perspective. I think, yes, you have to be able to project that enthusiasm that, yes, I think I have the life skills to do this role, even if I have to learn some of the technical skills. You can just say that in words in the interview. And if the interviewee says, well, sorry, I want somebody who can already do this, then it's the company's loss. It's not yours as an interviewee. You don't want to work for the company that says, sorry, you have to already fit this rigid hole, unless you are the sort of person who likes that box.
Yeah, and I think you're right. A lot of it is about fit with the company, and if they think you're going to do a good job, then then hopefully they'll take you on and they'll take that risk.
I think also, it's worth bearing in mind that job descriptions and personal specifications are put together based on the ideal of what an employer is looking for. They're not always realistic, and how often do they actually find any candidates that tick every single box? So I think candidates shouldn't be afraid of the fact that they don't tick all the boxes. And what's important is to highlight all the things that you can bring to the employer, that you are able to offer, and show the enthusiasm and willingness to learn any of the parts that you haven't specifically got experience in.
Absolutely. I think if you apply for a job that clearly has aspects to it that in which you don't have experience, I think clearly you're going to write a letter, and I would do some research on the company, obviously do as much research on the company as you possibly can, do some research around the areas that are lacking in terms of your skill set. And if you get to the point of actually having an interview, then clearly you've made progress, because the interviewers and the company, the potential employer, has seen your CV, so they will know that there are some gaps in your knowledge and experience, but they still decided that they want to interview you. So clearly that's a step forward. And then as the rest of you, I think, is saying, show that you've done some research, show that you know where the gaps are in your skill set, but talk about how you think those can be filled. And as Susie is saying, if you can project that enthusiasm through all of that work that you've done, the groundwork you've done, to say, I can do all these other things, and I have complementary skills, and this is what I'll do to learn what I need to learn in the business, then I think you should be successful. But I think if you view the fact that you've got an interview in the first place, then clearly the employer, I would suggest, is quite happy to consider somebody who doesn't tick, as Anne says, tick all of those boxes.
Marta, did you want to add to that?
Yes, so we had actually example, we have employed two people to join our group, and they actually didn't tick all the boxes. But what matters to us was that they would be team players. That was the main objective for recruiting the person, because when you look at the CRO organization, you have to be able to transfer project from one person to another very quickly if need to, because we do not have ownership of the project. One person doesn't keep the project to themselves. The contract has to be completed as quickly as possible. So there is, when someone has time, the project has to be quickly transferred. So those skills were paramount to us. And even though we knew that those people they don't have the technical skills, they had complementary, or maybe the skills that we believe they could easily transfer to learn what we needed them to learn. We kind of felt that they would be a better match in terms of the group and working as a team members. And I think that's what matters to us. So obviously different application and different employees will look at the different aspects. And I think it's sometimes the reading between the lines, or maybe the concept of how the company works will sometimes help you to toward or to think how you can convince them to that you will be a good fit, even though you don't have the full set of skills.
Yeah, I think that's the key thing really, is not being put off in terms of applying for a job just because you don't, meet all the criteria. As I think Anne said, it's rare that a candidate does sort of tick every single box, and as other people have said, it's demonstrating sort of what you will do to sort of fill that gap, showing how you think you can meet the expectations of the role. I think those are sort of the key things, not to be put off going for something in the first place. Okay, so we've had another question come in, so on a sort of different theme. Do you think Brexit will have an important impact on the life science industry in the UK, i.e. in terms of funding or workforce movement? So at Domain X at the moment, I don't think we have seen a lot of impact. It's hard to know the sort of long-term impact that it will have. We have a lot of European clients, and we've not really seen a change there. We're still seeing inquiries from Europe as well, which is great. We have a lot of employees who sort of come from Europe, and we've not really encountered too many issues there. We've obviously been supporting them, to make sure that they can still stay. I think, funding is perhaps more of an issue. Does anyone sort of want to comment and jump in there?
I think, like you, we've not seen a significant impact in terms of European business and interest and everything else, and we also have employees who are from mainland Europe. I think the other thing that's interesting is, again, talking about funding, clearly there's a new scheme, a European funding scheme, grant scheme, that UK life science companies will continue to have access to. So that's a positive thing. I think the other positive thing is that under European rules, under European state aid rules, if you're applying for a grant, and clearly most SMEs will apply for grants if they possibly can in our sector, because most of the money gets invested in R&D and getting businesses established. And there is a European rule it's called Undertakings in Difficulty rule, which basically says if more than 50% of the equity investment in your business has been lost essentially, and you're making losses that equate to 50% or more of your equity, then you don't qualify for some of the European grants, which is absolutely daft, because those are companies that actually need that funding. And even companies like Oxford Biomedica, again, who've been going for a number of years, very, very successful, multi-million-pound contracts, and obviously now significantly involved in making COVID. Even companies like that would fall foul of the Undertakings in Difficulty rule. Well, that's going to change now, because we're no longer in the EU. So there will be a different regime within the UK, which I think will mean in the long term that companies, SMEs and R&D companies, will qualify for grants that they probably don't qualify for now. So I think they're clearly, I'm not a great fan of Brexit. I think it's a mistake, but we have to live with it now. But I think we just have to take as many positives out of it as we possibly can.
Yeah. Anyone else want to comment on that?
I think the only comment I would make is that the whole concept of Brexit and the whole process of leading up to Brexit caused a massive amount of work for the pharmaceutical industry, but ever resourceful, the pharmaceutical industry got on and did what it needed to do to prepare itself. I mean, the biggest challenge was the complete lack of uncertainty as to what was actually going to happen. So everybody had to plan for the worst case scenario, which was the biggest workload, the most expensive workload, and really quite a nightmare for companies on the whole. But yeah, with the others, I'm yet to see, now that we've actually come through to the other side, I'm yet to see any massive impact as far as job roles and things are concerned.
Yeah, great. You seem to be having similar experiences, that doesn't seem to be having too much of a negative impact.
I think that perhaps it's because it's such a high-tech industry and it's so highly specialized that people select the best company to work with based on the best company to work with. because everyone's science is relatively unique. Obviously, there are ways of doing things that you could do through one company or another company, and you shop around for the correct vendor to outsource work to. But if the best vendor is on mainland Europe, of course, we're still going to choose them. And we outsource the majority of our research, where we don't have a lab anymore. We outsource everything that's lab-based. And we choose the best lab. It doesn't matter where in the world it is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we see a similar thing at the Domain X. People pick us because they think we'll do the best job, for the particular service.
Exactly.
Not down to the location.
So it's the same from the charge review perspective. We haven't seen any decline in the proposal. We actually saw the opposite, actually increasing the proposals and requests. But going back to the company I used to work, which is UCB, it's a Belgian company, but it has the very big R&D site in UK. And as an employee, we were all at the time very worried about the Brexit. But it's just that higher management conviction, convinced us that they really want to invest, and and if we really work very well as a company and as a site, they are not going to close it down just because of the Brexit. There might be some harder to overcome that Brexit issue and different rules that apply. But I think if the company functions very well, even though if it's European or it has the site here, I don't think it's going to make any difference whether it's Brexit or not.
Yeah. We've had another question. Perhaps we can move on to a slightly different topic now. We've only got 10 minutes left. What about performance barriers? What can hold you back from progressing, and any advice on how to tackle these? I guess if I can start on that. So yes, I think you clearly need to demonstrate that you can perform well in a particular role. I think it is very hard to be promoted and progress if you're not demonstrating that you are performing well. In terms of advice on how to sort of tackle any issues, I think perhaps that comes back to sort of mentors again, getting good advice. Getting feedback as well. I think it's really important to get feedback and sort of positive sort of critique of what you're doing is really important. And asking your sort of managers, where can you improve? Do they think there are any skills that you're lacking? And just being aware of that, rather than just sort of maybe carrying on as you are without sort of to develop yourself. I think it's really important to be thinking all the time, how can you add to your skill set? What new skills can you add? Yeah, Marta, did you want to?
I wasn't sure whether you finished, so sorry.
Yeah, that's all right.
So I was thinking, if you consider the lab career, at the very beginning of your journey, it's the delivery that matters. So the impact that you make is really there by working very hard and carrying out the experiments, very good quality, and having a good eye for the results and conclusions. Once you start progressing, there are different things that come into play. You have to start shifting from being lab-oriented and carry out so many experiments into more strategic sides, when you actually start influencing which way the company should go or which way the research should go. Offering different types of experiments, for example, or different technologies. So there is a shift as you progress higher up. But at the beginning of the journey, it's really the delivery and the hard work that really matters, that you can prove and you can show that and demonstrate that you are really determined and really committed to the work. And that's what gives you that initial progression. And then obviously having the mentorship at the later stage, when you actually develop those soft skills that can help you overcome the barriers that you may just feel you have, or maybe they are not there at all. You just maybe, you just have to be guided what is that actually matters in this specific circumstances and what you want to get to.
Yeah, and I think performance appraisals are a real opportunity for that. A lot of people don't like them, and clearly they take time and effort and everything else. But if you are going to be taking part in a performance appraisal, make an effort, put your own effort into that performance proposal so that you go to the meeting with whoever your manager is, having some positive thoughts about where you've got to and where you would like to get to. So come to an agreement every time you have one of those appraisals about, what are the next steps for you to progress, and what does your manager want from you, and what do you expect from your manager as well. It's got to be a two-way conversation. And provided you're meeting all of those targets and hitting those targets, and you're getting the help that you need, then that's the way that you'll progress. But it is a good question, because clearly not everybody is a good manager. And some people get intimidated by people who are career-minded and want to progress and are ambitious. And I think always bear in mind that actually, if you're not getting the support that you need from your manager, there should be recourse within the business for you to seek help from other people, and maybe your manager's manager or something like that. There will be recourse to talk to other people in the business. And that can be quite scary, because then you're going to go around your manager. But I think, always deal with your manager first. So if you're having some issues and you're not progressing the way you think you should be progressing, despite the fact you're hitting targets, I think you need to be open with your manager and say, look, I've hit all of these targets. Our expectation was that if I did that, this would be the next step for me. You're not making that happen for me. So if you can't do that, then I need to speak to somebody else in the company. Don't feel afraid to do that. But provided you're making the effort and you're putting the thought into your career, then most people will progress in their careers quite satisfactorily, I would have thought.
Thanks, Simon. Yeah, some really great points. And I agree, appraisals are a really great time to sort of reflect and think about your own performance. It's easy, on a day-to-day basis when you're really busy, just to focus on the immediate work. And it's a great time to sort of look at where you are and where you want to go.
And I think also, sometimes you do reach the end of the road with a particular company, and sometimes that is something you have to accept, and then that's the time to move on. And to pick up on a point that Simon made earlier about external mentors and people that he goes to for advice and conversations, that's the time when any external people who are not part of the company that you've got in your network, whose opinion you value or respect, and who can help you with making the decision about, is this really the end of the line? And if it is, where should I be looking to move on to? That's really the time to sort of bring those in. But hopefully, within the company, you will progress as you want to. But when the time comes, be ready also to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Susie, did you want to comment?
Oh, I think it would really just be emphasising what others have said. It's about communication. So if you perceive that you've hit a barrier, you need to talk to somebody to find out if that barrier is real, because I think sometimes people feel that they've hit a barrier, but actually all they need to do is put their hand up and say, can somebody help me over this? But then to actually assess whether or not the barrier is internal, whether it's external, whether it's a case that it doesn't matter how well you do, that there just isn't somewhere to move up, there isn't that space, and thinking sometimes quite innovatively and imaginatively about what progression looks like. So you may have a very fixed idea that progression means moving up to the next managerial level, progression means line managing, and I think Marta's experience in Charles River is great for explaining that. The idea that you can progress just as much in the lab as you can if you're being more of an active paper-based manager. And I think that those sorts of systems are really important. What is the barrier? Is it a real barrier? What's the other side of that barrier? What do you want progression to look like? And getting sometimes very external and possibly even sometimes unrelated advice on whether or not that is real and how to look at it and how to solve it, I think is important.
Yeah, and I think it's, the other point is we haven't touched on. There are so many different careers within life science companies. We've talked about lab careers and we've talked about management careers, but there's BD, there's regulatory, there's quality, you name it, there's a career in life sciences. And so, don't feel afraid if something interests you, which is something completely different, go for it. If it's something that actually, you think you'd be good at.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because careers are not necessarily linear. As you said, Suzanne, often people think in terms of, those progression steps up a given ladder. But that's not what my career has looked like. I've moved sideways and all over the place to get to where I am. It sounds like you have as well, Simon. You know, there are all kinds of ways to have a fulfilling career and to learn and develop along the way.
Thanks. I think we better wrap up now. Alicia's back on.
Yeah, I've re-emerged. Yes, I'm very sorry to have to halt the conversation. It's been very enjoyable. Really appreciate the time you've taken to share your own personal experiences, advice and tips on how to progress forward in whatever aspect of the sector that may be. And there's no doubt it will have certainly helped and guided some of the attendees on the session today. So thank you very much. And also thank you to all attendees. So just to recap, at 12:15 we are back in the live Zoom room, and that will be the food for thought lunchtime session, so very aptly named. At the conclusion of that session, we will also be announcing the winner of our Life Science Inspiration of the Year award. So not to be missed. I think voting has just recently closed, but yes, please do join us for that. Very exciting indeed. And with that, I'd just like to close the session and also remind all attendees, please make use of the conference app. One Nucleus has provided that, so you can continue the discussions and you can continue making those connections. So please do make use of that. And thank you very much all for joining. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. Well done,
Thank you.
Natalie. Thank you.